Welcome to Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host, Diane Kinderwater.
Welcome to the program. I'm Diane Kinderwater. Wow, we must have the worst medical practitioners in the country. We must have the worst doctors, worst surgeons. Why do I say that? Well, because we have the second highest percentage of malpractice lawsuits in the country. So they must be suing them because they're doing such a bad job in the surgery room? Is that why we have the second highest percentage of malpractice lawsuits? On the program, we're going to find out that is not the reason. It's because it's been very attractive for attorneys to sue doctors, nurses, estheticians, everything you can think about in the medical profession. On the program today, we're going to talk to Fred Nathan Jr. and discuss Think New Mexico and how they've researched this topic of malpractice lawsuits in the medical profession and what it means to our state, to our health care. The point is, what doctors would be encouraged to come here and practice if they think they're going to be sued. And why do they think they're going to be sued? Because it's so attractive to sue. Let's see what we can get. Well, on the show today, we're going to talk about the research that's been done this past 2 years and how Think New Mexico is now in the legislature trying to fight for our rights of Reds to have medical practitioners stay in our state and make it attractive to them. Please stay with us as we visit with Fred Nathan right after this. Okay, when I did that open, my guest was sitting here shaking his head saying, "No, Diane, we don't have the worst doctors." Well, but he's the one who told me, and he told me in this report, Think New Mexico, which Fred and his other folks with the think-oriented think tank, results-oriented think tank, did research showing that, yeah, they're being sued, second highest percentage of lawsuits against doctors, the medical practitioners. So I'm thinking, they must be doing a bad job if they're sued. You're still, Fred Nathan, you're still shaking your head.
We have some of the best doctors. We have the worst medical malpractice system in the country, which encourages lawsuits against these doctors. It's very lopsided towards lawyers and against the rights of patients, hospitals, and doctors. So an ideal system would be a system that makes patients, first of all, whole for the injuries that they've suffered and their pain and suffering. Secondly, you'd have a system that pays lawyers reasonably, but not excessively. And third, you'd have a system that's fair to doctors and hospitals. Our current system doesn't do any of those things. So let's start with patients, for example. They need to be made whole. But
if there is a problem, if there happens to be a problem,
right.
But you're saying oftentimes there really aren't the problems, but they're just bringing the lawsuits because they can, and it's easy.
Well,
and we have a low threshold.
We've made it very attractive. In fact, what we're really doing is making it attractive for trial attorneys from Texas to come in here and bring lawsuits because it's really a legal paradise for trial lawyers. At the same time, we're chasing away doctors and bankrupting hospitals. We should talk about Gallup as we get into this. But let's start with attorney's fees. So in medical malpractice cases, the way the lawyers are paid is they receive a contingent fee based on a settlement or a judgment. Sometimes that's like a third plus expenses.
Oh, wait, a third plus expenses?
Correct. But
so 33% of a judgment. So if it's $1 million judgment, $330 million would go to.
So they would receive a third.
Would go to the attorney.
Correct.
Plus the fee.
Plus expenses. So if they have expert witnesses and so forth, that comes out of the patient's portion of the settlement.
Could be half the settlement.
It could be. And because there's no cap on attorney's fees in New Mexico, as there is in progressive states like New York and California, it's a zero-sum game. The more that goes to the attorney, they can get as much as whatever they negotiate with the patient, 35%, 40%. It's a zero-sum game. So the more that goes to the attorney, the less that's left over for the patients. We'd prefer a system like progressive states like California. California caps attorneys' fees if there's a settlement at 25%. If there's a judgment, that's capped at a third, 33%. That would make more sense, and that would help to make the patients whole. There's also something called the Patients' Compensation Fund in New Mexico. However, a lot of the money that's in the Patients' Compensation Fund, which comes from taxpayer dollars, goes to attorneys. The way the system was set up originally is if there's a bad malpractice case where there's a huge judgment, first the patient is paid up to a cap that's set in state law, depending on whether it's a hospital or a doctor or so forth. If there's damages above the cap, they go to the Patient's Compensation Fund. The way it was originally structured is the patient would receive payments the rest of their life if they had expenses above the original settlement. A couple of years ago, the legislature changed it to create a lump sum payment. So there's an estimate that's been made, and the lawyers can then take their share. Whereas
Of our taxpayer dollars as well.
correct, and it's the
From
patient.
this compensation fund, they're taking.
Yeah,
okay.
and it's the patient's compensation fund, not the patient and attorney's compensation fund.
But the attorneys are getting some of that money as well.
Yes.
Hey, Fred, can you give me an example? Let's give an example of a kind of a simple possible lawsuit,
So
malpractice lawsuit.
let's say there's a lawsuit against a doctor and a hospital for malpractice. It's a legitimate case.
What types of lawsuits are there? I mean, I've heard of the cases where now they're really asking if you have, if it's your right hand or your left hand or what else were they saying? What side of the your lung? You got a right and the left because they want to make sure they take out the right thing, right?
Yeah,
Correct?
so let's say it's a legitimate malpractice case and they operate on the wrong organ
Yes.
or whatever it is.
Okay, that's what I hear about.
And the judgment isn't enough. They pay the cap. They pay up to the cap. So there's a cap for doctors, there's a cap for hospitals, but it's not enough to fully compensate. The legislature's created a patient compensation fund to pay money on top of that to make sure that that patient's going to be made whole. It used to be that they would just the patient would get paid as they had their medical bills, so they're kept whole. A couple of years ago, the legislature changed the law to create a lump sum payment where they have to make an estimate and say, well, Diane was injured. She's going to have medical bills for the next 40 years of her life. Let's make an estimate of what that is. Well, that's very convenient for the trial lawyers because they can take their payment up front. So if it's 40% or 33%, they take that out. And then
I'm the patient, I'm left with the remainder,
Correct.
60%, if I'm lucky, 50%, to last me the next 40 years.
right, that lump sum you may live longer than they estimate, in which case you'll run out of money to keep you whole or to make you whole. On the other hand, you might die prematurely, and then the taxpayer has paid out more to the patient and the attorney than is necessary. And that's why the previous system was better. It was a pay-as-you-go system, and that was better for patients who were made
Because
whole
I'll have money when I need it.
the rest of your life, and better for taxpayers. The system now is good for attorneys. It's not good for taxpayers, and it's not good for patients.
And we've always had this, or we did have the we had the pay-as-we-go?
We had the pay-as-we-go, but the legislature changed it several years ago. We'd like to go back to that system. And then another issue is punitive damages.
Wait, let's stay with going
Okay.
back. We had it. Why did they change it to the lump sum?
I'm not really sure, but I'm sure the trial lawyers advocated for a lump sum payment system, which, as I said earlier, is great for them, not so good for patients and not so good for taxpayers.
Wow. So think New Mexico is in the legislature lobbying, working on has written legislation to revert back to a system that was working.
Yes.
That's what you're
That's
doing
what we're
this
going to try to
session.
do in the 2025 session.
This
And we also
session.
want to address the punitive damages situation. And so for your viewers who may not know what that is, punitive damages are what should be awarded in very rare instances where there's been outrageous conduct.
Oh, punitive damages usually aren't in all these lawsuits?
They shouldn't be.
Ah.
It should only be when there's been outrageous conduct. But in New Mexico, we have the lowest standard for proving punitive damages in the country. Some states don't even allow punitive damages.
Oh, some states don't even allow it. Just
No,
cover the person for their health care.
Right.
Well, including the inconvenience and all of that, though, is that part of the health care, or would that be punitive?
No, that's what you would get in a normal case.
Okay.
Punitive damages is over and above
Okay.
what makes you whole. It's when there's been outrageous conduct. And so in New Mexico, our standard is by a preponderance of the evidence. So that means if the judge or the jury is about 51% sure that punitive damages are necessary, they can award them. In some states, it's not allowed. In Colorado, for example, they use the criminal law standard of you can only award punitive damages when it's by beyond a reasonable doubt. A middle standard is by clear and convincing evidence. That's higher than what we have currently. That's what a plurality of states do. That would be much more reasonable. And we take it a step further and say, why give a windfall to the lawyers? Why not use that punitive damages that are awarded and put it in a patient safety compensation fund so that we can improve the healthcare system and everyone can benefit from that, instead of showering a windfall on the attorneys that brought this case?
Because they're already being paid for the first part of the
Right, they're being compensated. The patient's been made whole, and that's the objective.
But the attorney is being paid also on that part.
Right.
So the punitive is above and beyond, and you're saying, why should this?
We want the attorneys to be paid a reasonable fee. They deserve it, and if they recover a settlement for their clients, they should be paid a reasonable fee. There's no need to give them a windfall, though. That's money that would be better used to benefit all New Mexicans with a patient safety fund.
How would that patient safety fund be used?
I think it could be used with, one example would be to turn that money over to the Department of Health and use it as grants to incentivize hospitals maybe and doctors to change
or something?
better
Okay.
training. Exactly.
So that would benefit everybody. So if a mistake was made, negligent mistake, and they're the punitive, why maybe even benefit just the one patient? It could benefit the entire system with this fund.
Right, and we were talking about a case in Gallup where this was a hernia surgery gone wrong. The case settled, or not settled, there was a $58 million judgment. Most of that was punitive damages. That's going to put that hospital into bankruptcy court. The hospital in Gallup has 340 healthcare providers that we desperately need to keep in New Mexico. They'll be out of work if that hospital closes. And the 56,000 people in Gallup who depend on that hospital will now be in a medical desert where they'll have to travel to Albuquerque if they need hospital care. And
60 million. So they were it was now it hasn't been paid out yet.
no.
I mean, 60 million.
But if it's upheld and it's paid out, it will bankrupt that hospital and create a medical desert in that community for 56,000 people. And as it's been pointed out, that's like a death sentence, because if those people don't have a hospital in their community, if they have a heart attack or a stroke where you need to get to a hospital immediately, they're not going to have time to drive to Albuquerque. So that's what I meant when I said earlier, we want a system that doesn't bankrupt hospitals or doctors. I was talking to a doctor yesterday who said that her husband retired early because he was afraid that if he got sued, he could, he spent his whole life working diligently and hard and serving patients and didn't want to lose it all in a medical malpractice case. More and more doctors are just settling because they don't want to roll the dice that they get hit with punitive damages and they're bankrupted. So that's why we think there needs to be reform with punitive damages. The lump sum payment system has to be changed, and attorney's fees should be capped. And then we can get to the system that I described earlier, where patients are made whole and lawyers are paid a reasonable but not excessive fee, and we're not chasing away doctors and bankrupting hospitals. The irony here is that we're attracting lawyers from Texas more and more because our legal landscape is so favorable to attorneys. At the same time, we're chasing doctors away. And it's what's that old saying about pity New Mexico, so far from heaven, so close to Texas? We really don't need to be attracting lawyers from Texas here. And this whole system needs to be rethought. It's broken, and it's very destructive to our healthcare system.
And Think New Mexico has been, again, working 2 years on reforming this healthcare, finding solutions for the healthcare worker shortage. And as you mentioned, these doctors are retiring or moving because they don't want to face these malpractice lawsuits that we have that are so easily to come upon. That's just one of 10 points, and
Correct.
People can find more information. We have more to talk about lawsuits, but with Think New Mexico on your webpage, tell them how to find that.
It's www.thinknewmexico, written out as one word, .org, and they can go to the policy report section and download the entire report.
Here's the report.
And they can go to our action center and send a letter to their legislators, the governor and the lieutenant governor, and ask them to change this system. And I'm so glad you pointed out, this is one of 10 proposals, the medical malpractice reform. It's one of the most serious ones, and I think it's one of the reasons that's made this state so difficult to attract doctors and retain doctors.
And we're going to talk about the shopping for a venue, but before we do, how did you come up with this as a problem, one of your 10 points, this medical malpractice? We are the second highest in the country. Just your research shows this. Anecdotally, people were saying, it's really easy to sue here and get a judgment because the thresholds are so long.
It's all of the above. We just dove into it, and I didn't know half of these things. Until, you brought up venue shopping. That's another thing that's built into our laws that makes it very favorable to attorneys, but not so favorable to doctors and hospitals. And this is when a malpractice occurs in a part of the state where juries are not, are responsible and not especially generous. And
what do you mean responsible, not especially generous? Maybe they're more practical, conservative thinking?
Fiscally responsible, and they want to make the patient whole, but they don't want to go overboard. So let's say, for example, there's a malpractice in one of these communities, let's just say Hobbs. And let's say the patient dies. Under New Mexico law, they can bring that case in, say, Las Vegas, where the juries are much more generous, or Espanola, or Santa Fe, where I live, by hiring an attorney for the estate, even though the doctor, the nurse, the physician assistant, all the witnesses are in Hobbs, the case then gets moved to a jurisdiction which is much more favorable. We talked about that case involving the hospital in Gallup. The malpractice occurred in Gallup. The trial occurred in Santa Fe.
Where he was awarded about
$58 million.
Wow. Mostly
yes.
punitive.
Yeah.
So that's called venue
shopping.
And so what are you suggesting? What does Think New Mexico suggesting?
We would end venue shopping. There's no point in doing that. The malpractice cases should be tried where the malpractice occurred.
Well, a criminal case is is tried in the community where it occurred.
Unless there's some prejudice, and in
Yeah.
rare cases,
But
a
I mean, it's
case
the community
where
of
there's
your-
a lot of publicity.
But it's a community of your peers. That's the idea.
Correct. And, so I don't know that that jury in Santa Fe, when they awarded $58 million, cared as much as a jury would in Gallup that this could shutter that hospital and put 340 healthcare workers out of work and close a hospital.
It's interesting you said, of course, I read this. I read your press release on this whole topic. I just know personally, as many of our viewers, you can't get in to see a doctor. I mean, my doctor in Santa Fe is wonderful, but I'm saying other procedures, other tests, other exams, other things. Wow, people feel like they're going to die before they can get in. So this is, actually I was talking to the people here at the station. They said, yeah, I said, are you listening to the show? Yeah, this has happened to me, so it's happening. So even if a person isn't involved in a lawsuit, and again, our hearts go out if there's a malpractice, nobody wants that.
No.
But if they understood that, this malpractice lawsuit means that we're losing doctors and medical people, then people will take a notice, because maybe a viewer say, well, I'm not involved in medical malpractice. It doesn't have anything to do with me. But it does.
It absolutely does. And all of these cases are making it more and more difficult for doctors and hospitals to get insurance. And if they get insurance, their insurance has gone through the roof. So I was talking to the head of a hospital in northern New Mexico who explained to me, because our medical malpractice premiums have gone up so much, it's getting more and more difficult to provide charity care. So it ripples through the system, and you're exactly right. Everybody's affected. Here's a statistic that might just collapse the whole system. Last year, we found the insurance loss ratio in medical malpractice cases in New Mexico was $1.83 was paid out by insurance companies for every dollar they collected in medical malpractice premiums. So after a while, and I've talked to the superintendent of insurance, we're going to run out of insurance companies that are willing to write insurance in New Mexico because of all the medical malpractice cases that are brought, some of them frivolous, and the judgments that are paid out with this legal landscape that allows for these exorbitant punitive damages.
Wow, that's another repercussion of all of this scary
Yeah.
stuff. You had mentioned in doing the research, some of these things were new to you. I mean, it's new to me. I've experienced it, but I didn't really know why. I mean, I know physicians are leaving, didn't know the malpractice lawsuit portion. Why?
Most of what's gotten attention in New Mexico about medical malpractice are the caps. And a tremendous amount of attention has gone into that. It's a very shiny thing. And we looked at other aspects of the system that lead to this problem that we're getting no attention, and we're going to be talking about it. We may not get it done this session, but we're perseverant, and we'll keep bringing it back until we get this system put back into balance. It's just too lopsided towards the attorneys right now.
And too unfair to the doctors, the insurance companies, the taxpayers, and the patients.
Exactly right. And
Unless
very
you've
destructive to our healthcare system.
What should people do then? Go online, read your report.
I'd encourage them to go to our website, click on the Action Center. There's a prescripted letter to legislators and the governor and lieutenant governor. We have no pride of authorship, and I encourage them to just talk about their lived experience, about like what you were saying earlier, Diane, about how difficult it is to find doctors, and if you have one, to get in to see them, and to really focus right now on this healthcare worker shortage, not just doctors, but nurses, emergency medical technicians, pharmacists, and so forth, because the longer we wait to address
the
this,
worse it's gonna go.
the harder it's going to get to solve.
Because through this report, you're showing that we lost 30% of our doctors over the past number of years, and then next 5 years, maybe 40% might be retiring.
40% of our doctors are over 60 years of age, and we anticipate they'll be retiring by 2030.
If they're not scared off with these lawsuits, they could be retiring. So the action really is now to take this issue on. And the
Correct.
legislature up there lobbying, people can do their point. In just the 2 minutes we have left, tell me a little bit about the taxes, the gross receipts tax. And we just have 2 minutes.
That's another issue that makes this state unattractive to doctors. We're one of only 2 states that taxes medical services. And that's not paid by the patients. That has to be eaten by the doctors. Our gross receipts tax, if you just look across the state on average, is a little over 7%. So that's 7% that gets taken out that they wouldn't have in other states. And it's like on things like deductibles or co-pays. And you're probably wondering, and your viewers are wondering, well, why is the doctor paying that? It's because that can't be passed on to Medicare or Medicaid because the federal government will not pay state taxes. Other states don't have these taxes, so it's not a problem in other states.
But I've never been charged I've never been charged on a copay all my life. So they're eating that, the 7%.
That's right.
Wow. People don't maybe realize that either.
So
we got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. The legislature did suspend the tax, although it's still hitting some practices. We would just simply abolish it so that the only state that's doing this would be Hawaii. And if you have private, let's say you have a patient who has private insurance, the insurance companies write it into their contracts that they will not reimburse state taxes. So this is a simple thing that could be fixed in this session, and we'll, Senator Jeff Steinborn of Las Cruces has stepped up and said, I'll carry a bill to abolish that tax.
Okay, thank you for all that you do, all that your organization does. It's really a matter of life and death, and we do appreciate your efforts. And we appreciate KCHF TV for inviting you on to explain all of this to us. It's actually easy reading, so take a look. It's very interesting. Thanks for watching the show. I'm Diane Kinderwater. Make it a great year and a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinderwater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program, email us at info@kchftv.org or call us at 505-345-1991. Join us again for Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater.